Hello, and thank you for choosing to spend a bit of your evening with me today. I am happy to have you, and hopefully, you can find something in this presentation interesting. This is the digital version of a panel to be given at Otakon 2023, which will be released online on Clear and Sweet on the same time I'm actually giving this panel live and in person on Friday night at 8:15 p.m. This is for all of you who are too far away to come to Washington, D.C., and also saves me from recording the panel at the convention. This panel does include some audience participation in parts, so I have invited my friend Mikeru to fill in for the audience.
Hey everyone.
So if you missed Thinking About Anime 101, the Basics of Textual Criticism, that's understandable, considering I gave it 4 years ago at Otakon 2019. But don't worry, because in this panel we're going to cover everything that you would need to speak about art from a very basic perspective, or do a very functional reading of an anime. I specifically wanted to return and do this for all the Zoomers. So, out of curiosity, how many of you out there are either under 25 years old or identify as Gen Z?
Well, I'm definitely a bad demographic for that because I am like firmly like Gen X to millennial.
All right, I'm going to consider that somebody in the audience said they are, and I'm going to speak to them, not to you, Mike. But deal.
No
All right,
problem.
all right. Society failed you, and society's going to fail you in a lot of ways as you grow up, Zoomers. But I think the way I want to talk to you about tonight is how society failed you in regards to textual criticism. Because I think the pendulum of the zeitgeist swings back and forth, and the way I see it, you all were caught up in a nadir of quality textual criticism. It's not some mystical spell. It's not something you unlock after doing 4 years of an English minor at college. You don't need to have read anyone in particular or have any specific background to get started, to share your ideas, or to get some enjoyment out of doing it. And it is most certainly not worthless. Anyone can do it, everyone should, and I say with no hint of hyperbole or facetiousness, it will make you a better person. How many of you are familiar with this meme? I hate this meme. No singular meme has done more harm to the public perception of art criticism. It encourages you to laugh at overthinkers to the point of disregarding any and all readings of art. And hey, maybe you did have an English class full of postmodernist drivel making crack readings without substantiation. Maybe there was no meaning behind the blue curtains. That doesn't mean that textual criticism isn't worthwhile. Not only do you get to collaborate and share ideas about art or intellectual pursuits of the truth and knowledge, and it's worthwhile for that alone, but engaging with media is inherently also an inward journey. You find yourself by questioning your own ideas and biases in your worldview. It can cause you to question society and all the ideas that you take for granted and haven't thought about, just assumed. It's something that's sorely needed in today's space. And forgive me if I get indignant here, but textual criticism should be self evidently valuable, at least for anime. It is very easy to write blue curtains and beguile some intentionality through that misty fog, although that's a little unfair to good authors. But if you are making an anime, something that takes such effort and is such a collaborative endeavor, such a large production, assuming that there's no intentionality behind the stuff that is being produced, it just doesn't make sense. And here, I have some proof. This is a behind the scenes QA pass of The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, one of the greatest anime films ever made. These are the directors Tatsuya Ishihara and the late Yasuhiro Takemoto. They are talking in this, very specifically in this scene, they're pointing out that Kyon's scarf is the wrong shade of blue. Anyway, what we'll be talking about over this presentation, uh, three things. Explaining literary criticism in so very brief. We could start back at Plato. We could but we're going to gloss over the next 2,500 years because I have a lot to say about Chainsaw Man later in this presentation, and it's kind of boring.
Woo!
Yeah. Uh,
Oh,
we are going to give you the tools you need to do an anatomy of a reading and enable you to go through it, and then we'll look at Chainsaw Man in ways of making our own reading. So this is the one history slide, and stick with me for this. Because arguing over authorial intent and does art require a message or a meaning has been a thing since art was invented. These two that we have on screen are the most recent and kind of the polar extremes of what you could consider an art criticism. New criticism is a modernist movement, and it was, around World War II and after the post-war period of everything having a closed, formalist message, a grand narrative. There's an objectivity to a work that is present within the work, and you need nothing else outside of the work to better understand the work itself. If you just didn't get it or you didn't agree with what the author intended, you were just too dumb as a viewer to understand what they were going for. Reader response criticism came out of the 60s and 70s. It's a postmodernist movement that was born to conflict against the modernist experience or way of looking at art. The quote I have to share with you is from one of the seminal works of the reader response theory and postmodernism in literary criticism. It's from Roland Barthes' The Death of the Author in 1967. He states, to give a text an author and assign a single corresponding interpretation to it is to impose a limit on that text. And that's how the postmodernist view of literary criticism expanded. That you can't really say anything definitive about art because everybody's reading is different, it's all equally valid, and the intent is only what is consumed by the reader. The extension of this postmodernist reader response theory is how we arrived at the dismissive blue curtains. So, though these two represent the polar extremes, the truth, quite obviously, lies somewhere in the middle. The fact remains that you are entirely unique from every other viewer of an anime, but at the same time, you're not that different from everyone else in the world. And embracing this duality will allow you to have a more comprehensive view of art. Anime, like all art, draws on these shared cultural myths and tropes that resonate differently with different audiences. When you make a reading, you say, I'm making a claim about this art from the perspective of whatever. Could be anything. Could be something you're knowledgeable or passionate about. Could be something else that you saw. Could be your own anecdotal experiences. You draw the connections and you put in the work to support them. This is the skill of criticism. It is the muscle. It is also, for example, why parasocial relationships to critics are valuable. Because you get to know other people by how they take in art. And once you understand them, their tastes, and how they tend to view things, you not only understand the art, but you understand them better as well. It's also why engaging with media critically tells us about ourselves. You can have these shared grander narrative readings, like you cry at sad rain scenes, and so does everybody else. Those show you how connected you are, the universality of art. But at the same time, you also have your differences, something unique about your perspective, about something to explore that teaches you about your biases and desires. Let's practice. That's a lot.
okay.
Who's familiar with this anime?
Freeze, free.
What do you think of when you see Free?
Hot sexy boys going for a swim.
Thank you. Yes, yes. How many of you understand the sexual consumption of the male body? Right?
Uh, oh yeah.
Yeah, you may find this relatable. There is a self insert character in Free that does exactly this on screen. It is so obviously intended, I would say. There is a preponderance of evidence, to use a legal term. It's
Ooh.
incredibly hard to argue that Free is not doing this or inviting this reading. So, like, we're done, right? We're solved. Like,
Yep.
intended reading identified. Well, how many of you were competitive swimmers? Yeah.
Only in elementary school, but yeah.
Well, I was throughout
Oh.
most of my adolescence and into adulthood, and I can tell you that what is on screen in Free is the exact same situations that I encountered in my life as a competitive swimmer. And that's a reading that not everybody is going to have, obviously. And yeah, you can understand it through broader sports drama angles, and I think you still get it. But there's something special about that unique reading. And of course, the show can support both of these readings. You can enjoy Free in one way and also in the sports drama way. So, this is a brilliant example of what is the primary intended reading of a show. How much evidence is there to support the consumption of the show in one way versus another? What makes for a better show, honestly? What do you want to get out of Free? There's no need to limit yourself. You can be multitudes and have multitudes of different appreciations and readings for art. The art's multitudes as well. All right, so very quickly we have to address Hitchens' razor, which is really the default metric to substantiate anything we're going to say here. It simply says that that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Basically, you just need to support how you feel or the way you're interpreting something. I've got a couple examples for this. I know what you may think that, like, well, my feelings are just what I'm basing my reading upon. And then you get into the kind of Socratic method of why. Why did the anime make you feel this way? And what about your experiences in your life made you feel this way? So we kind of have this scale when we're doing readings. We have our emotional reactions, our feelings, or what we think initially of the work. And then we have whatever is underpinning those feelings. Uh, because supporting your feelings with evidence is the way that you're going to about justifying your reading. Now, these can range from small to the entire work or the core theme. And I want to caution first, before we get into it, about considering like very small things as mistaking them for a reading. I think there's a lot of people that sometimes get caught up in references. And certainly a show like Kill la Kill has so many references to things like Ashita no Joe or sex and violence at Mach speed and so many varied things. And while they can contribute to a reading, I don't think they constitute most of what we're talking about in a reading. Here's a great example. I was on the podcast Pen Pals recently with a couple of first time viewers of the anime Puella Magi Madoka Magica. It was very interesting for me, who has seen this show tens, hundreds of times, to go back and talk to somebody who was just now viewing it for the first time, because we got a lot of these novel readings. One of the presenters suggested that there was some correlation between the girls in the Holy Quintet and the classical elements, including ether. So they tried to map these elements onto the girls, and yeah, fire and water match for Kyoko and Sayaka, but there's nothing really to support that wind or earth match up with Mami or Madoka in any real way. So this is kind of an element where you have an idea, but then the evidence that you find doesn't really support that reading of the show.
Hmm.
That's not to say there's no value in the thought behind it, though. you can discard readings but then still take information from them. I particularly liked the idea that Homura is something that's outside of the other four, or that relating her to Ether, that she doesn't really belong with the others, which is a valid reading in and of itself that we could explore and expound upon. And I kind of talked about in my 16 and a half hour breakdown of every shot and directing choice of Madoka Magica. That's up on YouTube, on youtube.com/clear and sweet. Here's another great one. This is for all the people that say, well, I don't have novel or interesting perspectives on art. I don't have anything valuable to say. And yeah, maybe you only have your feelings, but I think that's limiting yourself. This is a kind of a famous reading that I saw. I saw a presentation on this by Charles Dunbar from the Study of Anime. He's talking about reading Kill la Kill through the lens of Japanese imperial history and mythology. And this shows the value of being more read and more educated. It's like doors that open up to you once you have read, watched, or learned something, and draw those comparisons between them. Because there's maybe like 3 people on Earth who not only speak English, but have the background to be able to make this reading and have seen Kill la Kill. And it's so unique. It's such a interesting perspective that a lot of other people aren't going to have the background to be able to do this reading without explicitly going forth and researching it. So I think it's a way of saying, find what you do know and try and bring that into your readings and go from there. Another famous one that I love a bunch is, some ages and ages ago I read a reading of Neon Genesis Evangelion through the lens of Wild Wolf pack dynamics, and it's always stuck with me in my mind of just such a crazy reading. And I don't know, I don't remember the evidence, but you can do anything. You can compare anything to anything as long as you are able to find the evidence to support it. All right. Those are the tools you need for a reading. Now that we are armed with knowledge, let's make a reading of Chainsaw Man's anime. Let's do a criticism. I would ask to you all right now, what's the first thing that springs to mind about the Chainsaw Man anime?
Ooh, a lot of abuse.
Mmm, that's good. That's good. Okay. Uh, yeah, let's instead go with the CGI zombies. That's right.
Okay, abusing
Yes.
CGI zombies. Yes, let's go.
CGI zombies. Yes. All right. All right. All right. We'll get to the rest of Chainsaw Man, but humor me first.
Okay.
Studio Mappa has been entirely open with how they use different animation techniques and mixed media in their anime to create the final product, and they talk a lot about how they use CGI in their shows. There's even behind the scenes footage on their YouTube channel. It goes into all of the things. And yeah, you can go see that the same people that animated the idol zombies from Zombieland Saga Revenge are indeed the same people that animated the zombies in episodes 1 and 12 of Chainsaw Man. And you can use this evidence to construct a reading that talks about what they learned from portraying the shambling Taya Yamada, and cast that forward onto how they did in their later work of Chainsaw Man. But this is whack. Why is this quite possibly the silliest place to start a reading of Chainsaw Man? Because it doesn't say anything interesting enough. We have evidence, it is a valid reading, but it's one on the periphery of understanding Chainsaw Man. It does not adequately describe what Chainsaw Man is, and we need to get at that core. But this, of course, begets the idea of a core or an essence or that thing we talked about earlier, that there's something here more central for understanding Chainsaw Man, and that some readings are more effective at understanding the appeal of the show than others. So, with that in mind, let's go on to what you actually know as the biggest reading of Chainsaw Man. And that is, of course, any comparison of any story with itself. Now, particularly in anime, very rarely is a work original or without adaptation. Usually we have some other interpretation of the story, but in a different medium that we can use to talk about or compare contrast. And I use that word interpretation very deliberately. Because remember that postmodernism happened. The grand narrative is dead, the author is dead. They are only the person with the loudest megaphone on to share their opinion of how a story goes. I caution very heavily the sacrosanctity of the original work. Everything is an adaptation, from an anime to a novelization to a dub to a mobile game
Woo!
to a fanfic.
Woo!
They're all in and of themselves new and separate texts, and not one is in and of itself more or less true than the original. Simply different. Indeed, here's a direct quote from the author of Mermaid Melody Peachy Peachy Pitch, which I assume far fewer of you have seen than Chainsaw Man. But other authors, like the Trigon author, have said the same thing, saying, I believe that the original work and the animation are two different things. So I was looking forward to seeing what kind of characters the animation and voice actors would create. This is a huge thing. And this allows for some great metatextual case studies when the standard narrative changes over the run of an anime. I'm thinking of things like Neon Genesis Evangelion's Rebuild movies, or Madoka Magica Rebellion, or even video games like Nier Automata. But perhaps we have lost the thread a little bit. It's all just to say that though one person controls the copyright to an intellectual property, an idea is by its nature crowdsourced, and everyone who consumes it and creates within and around it defines it further. And if you like that idea, you can head on over to youtube.com/clearandsweet and watch my video on another work of textual criticism, Beautiful Fighting Girl. Alright. By far and away, the biggest reading on Chainsaw Man is that the anime did not adapt the manga well enough. This is a particularly easy reading to make for so many anime fandoms for a couple of reasons. First is that there's a confirmation bias. That is, fans of a manga are more likely to watch the anime. I mean, that sounds obvious, but I mean, statistically, they are relying on your love of the established IP, an infatuation with the material, and that's the whole like driving capitalistic force behind why an anime gets adapted. So you're gonna have this reading popping up again and again, especially because the people that liked the manga will have watched both the anime and read the manga. They will have the necessary information to make this reading. It's not a very obscure set of background to have. You're comparing two independent works with an obvious through line. And it's easy, too. You don't have to do years of research into Shinto symbols or wolf pack dynamics, or you don't even have to look up how to animate CGI zombies. All you need to do is read a manga and watch the anime. It's also really easy because it's narrative in the same way. It follows the same events. And obviously not every manga adaptation is going to be like this, but Chainsaw Man is one where it sticks fairly closely to the manga. And it makes it then incredibly easy to compare. That they changed this, they didn't include this scene. Oh no. And I think where a lot of people get tripped up is that ostensibly you would assume that both the anime and the manga have the same essence, the same intent, or the same message as a piece of art. But why do we assume that? This is an online petition made by Japanese fans asking for a remake of the Chainsaw Man anime, that it was an incredibly bad
Oh,
adaptation. And
boo.
yeah, and maybe hey, this is an emotional take, right? Maybe it
Yeah.
started as an anecdotal reaction of like I don't like this, and then they thought about why. I don't know. Um, but to claim something is a bad adaptation is so broad, it's so sweeping that one, they're going to need to be more specific. And then also, they're going to need a lot of support in what they're saying. And, credits to the fans because they did exactly that. So these are their main points straight from that petition. And I've seen Western fans say similar things, so I don't think there's any cross cultural reading here or accountability that we need to acknowledge. What I want to do though is immediately knock off the second and the third points on this list of complaints. For those, if we wanted to talk about direction and storyboarding or music, sound, and voice acting, uh, we have to talk prescriptively, and we need to have the background, a massive background, on what makes good storyboarding and directing in anime or film, or what makes good background music and sound direction. And that's just so broad. It's far too broad to say anything without a lot of work put into it. Musicians, animators, directors, critics, everyone has. There's artists who spend their entire lives trying to pin those down. We would need a vast database, including the most effective and renowned works of visual narrative storytelling in anime and outside of anime. So, while I highly encourage you to think about things like this, especially if you have passion or experience in these areas, it's outside of our purview for what we're talking about. Let's hone in on that first point, that the Chainsaw Man anime somehow failed to capture the essence of the original work. And to do this, I want to come at it backwards. This is the single most important or biggest tip I have to give to you for how to go about textual criticism. That is, treat the work with respect, find how it is seen in the best light possible, and give them the benefit of the doubt. Assume intentionality. So, we also are saying that instead of assuming that the anime should match the manga in intent, let's treat it as an adaptation, as we've already talked about. Let's look for what intent the show does have. Because if you don't, if you don't come into it with giving the show the benefit of the doubt, you run into lenses that are either not really applicable or, geez, even antithetical for viewing the intended work. Some examples, right? Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball is a very successful franchise, and it is notoriously not that great towards its female characters. And you can go check out plenty of these readings. They
Yep.
are online. People have done them. And it's hilarious and kind of infamous for it at this point. And they, to their credit, they've started walking this back in the later stuff in Supers and whatnot. And it is, by all means, a valid reading. Uh, and there's plenty of evidence all throughout Dragon Ball that it just does its female characters very dirty. But I think there's something narrow minded about this. Because it's kind of really obvious that Dragon Ball is not trying to be that. Uh, and then if you are assuming that you want to look at it through that lens, then you are placing your culture and values before those of what the work asks you to do. It's like thinking about One Piece and saying, well, it's a bad romance. Like, yeah, it's not trying to be. And this is the Futurama quote on the right with Lur. He says, why does Ross, the largest friend, not simply eat the other five? And it's this example of the cultural divide, or setting aside your culture and understanding the culture that made the art. Or not just culture, but the intent or the people behind it, or the core that makes it an enjoyable show. And Dragon Ball is a good show, right? It's not, if you judge by other metrics, then it's a great show. You, as a viewer and as a critic, should endeavor to understand what makes the narrative engaging to the people who enjoy it or consume it. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with every value in every show you watch. Of course not. And of course, media in our society changes over time, most times for the better. But there's this half apocryphal quote from Aristotle that you may have heard before. It says, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. I ask, how does a show ask to be read? Let's then meet Chainsaw Man where it's at. I alluded to this earlier, but you don't get hundreds of thousands of man hours into creating a work without first sitting down and thinking about what the themes that you want to say are for, I don't know, at least 20 minutes. They made 12 original endings to this anime. Of course, there is a very core theme and intent in Chainsaw Man's anime adaptation. It's very hard to create anime without one, though Studio Gohans may try. So assume intentionality. What does each choice do, and what can we derive from that? Your skill as a critic will improve when you look specifically at this. Let's do just this. Imagine you are watching episode 4 of Chainsaw Man, and you have just seen the most gory, violent fight against the Bat Devil and all that, and just a mess of guts and blood. And then the second half of episode 4 features none of that. It starts with over a minute and a half of Aki's morning routine. He wakes up, opens the balcony door, brushes his teeth, boils water, brews coffee, reads a paper, etc., etc. The rest of the episode goes into him living with Power and Denji. And just remember the cost of production of anime. If something is on screen, even for a second, it's important. If it's shown on screen for almost half an episode, and as much as the violence that's on the cover of the manga and the anime, then on a very basic level, what is that saying? It's saying domestic life is important. So now we expand a little bit. The previous line before this part of the episode is Aki saying, I'm the same guy I've always been. Nothing's changed. And here's the kicker, though. The Aki morning routine, it's all anime original. It was quite popular for being something that Mappa added to the anime adaptation. But even if you had no idea this was anime original, even if you lacked the context or knowledge, you'd probably still get the domestic life focus. Now, with that context, though, you know this was an informed decision to emphasize that. So now we've got something of a working hypothesis. Can we find any other anime original stuff to emphasize this aspect? By God, that's the final ED and last scene of the entire show. It is Denji, Power, and Aki going shopping for their dinner, cooking it, and eating it together. So happy, so content, just to be with each other, just eating the food, just enjoying the moment. Here's a secret for me, so we can have this parasocial relationship. I don't watch action shows. I don't watch shows with gore or violence or power levels. I think that's stupid. I haven't even read the Chainsaw Man manga. But I know simple togetherness and contentedness when I see it. I watch a lot of those shows. And I know there's a term for this. This is a found family. So our nascent reading takes shape. Perhaps the intent director Ryu Nakayama sought, perhaps his and the teams at MAPPA's reading of Chainsaw Man was finding togetherness and belonging and contentedness and building that up. And now we look for more evidence. We hit Denji and Power's purposelessness, their lack of a reason to fight, and their seemingly laughable attempts at desires. And we hit the orphan aspect of not knowing what they should want out of life, of never having the luxury to consider it. And then we've got enough evidence to build our interpretation of Chainsaw Man. But, let's take it a step further, if only because, boy, that sounds like another anime that I know. Mawadu Penguin Drum is a story about unwanted kids who grew into unwanted teenagers coming together and forming a family and learning to value the time that they have together. Simple compare and contrast here. We can talk about how the themes play out differently in these shows. We can point out the subtle differences, point out how they both make the same point about creating a found family and sharing time together. We can do a whole entire reading just using these two data points and the theme that we identified in both of them. And then, you just edit 10 minutes of footage under it, and bada bing, bada boom, Bob's your uncle, and you've got a video essay for YouTube with less than 700 videos. But that's a reading. What I want to point out here is that though we have this found family reading now, this wasn't a critique of the Chainsaw Man anime is different from the manga protest reading that we talked about earlier. We didn't contest or counter anything about their reading. We just came up with our own. And this is meaningful because there's so many other readings you could do. You could talk about Chainsaw Man through the lens of Sakuga, right? Like, as an action anime, how intense can you make the fight scenes? How much viscerality do you feel? And you could even limit it to Studio Mappa. There's plenty there of taking fight scenes of Jujutsu Kaisen or Attack on Titan, and how well and what style they're animated, how big the smears are, all that kind of stuff. There's Sakuga fans who live in this space. Or you could look at it through an economic perspective. Mappa has been open with the fact that they funded the entire show of Chainsaw Man themselves. They risked the entire company. They bet all of Mappa on the success of Chainsaw Man. There's also this kind of rumor, I guess, or misinformed reading that Chainsaw Man was a financial failure because the Blu-ray sales were not as good as some other shows. And there's videos by Canapa Effect and many others on YouTube that talk about how this is factually inaccurate, and they deconstruct that reading and show you the truth about that it did make plenty of money. Another reading we could do, again talking about Studio Mappa. Studio Mappa, known very much for taking on a lot of work and very aggressively kind of getting a lot of that work out there, maybe at the detriment of their employees. Ooh. So things like Denji's reference of a union job in the manga, conspicuously absent from the anime. And maybe this is just a piece of evidence, or maybe this informs your entire reading of Chainsaw Man as through the lens of labor at Mappa. I don't know, could be. So now we've got kind of the cornucopia of readings that Chainsaw Man enables. And this is only a drop in the bucket. This is only just a few that came to mind while I was making this presentation. You could talk about anything. You can compare things across genres. You can compare things across mediums. You can say whatever you'd like from whatever perspective. And the value of your reading is determined by how integral it is to understanding the show and also how well supported it is. So I challenge you then to say, what will you say about art? What strikes you as interesting and what do you want to share with other people? And in doing so, what will you say about yourself and about art? I sincerely hope it will be something interesting, and I wish you the best of luck in making the world a more interesting place. Oh, I couldn't include this GIF anywhere in this presentation. I tried though. But if you're at Otakon, Takia Saito, who animated this, is going to be in the building. I would recommend you check them out, the trigger panels. Anyway, that's the presentation. I hope you learned something, and I would bid you all to subscribe to Clear and Sweet on YouTube and contact me on Discord or Twitter or YouTube if you have anything to say or would like to talk to me further about any of the subjects I brought up in this presentation. Thank you.
Yay!
Patchy, patchy, patchy.
Patchy, patchy, patchy. Hey, I know that character now. I watched a couple episodes of that show.
Oh, good. Oh, good.